Probably four, apart from the internet, where humanity essentially acquired a nervous system and all of humanity's knowledge was instantly accessible from anywhere. There's sustainable energy, so the transition to sustainable production and consumption of energy, hopefully the extension of life to another planet, writing genetics, and AI. I'm more optimistic than Stephen Hawking or Martin Rees, who's that astronomer royal. He thinks it's quite likely that civilization will end this century. But I'm personally more optimistic about civilization, and I did say multi-planetary. You say, what's the future you want? What's the future that seems, oh, that'll be a good one? Then I think you want to have a future where we're a spacefaring civilization, a multi-planet species, we're out there exploring the stars. I think that'd be great. But I mean, a strong second, and I think for some people maybe it will be the first motivation, is the preservation of the future of consciousness and human civilization as we know it. I mean, I think we have effectively created a kind of a superorganism. Before the internet, and particularly before advanced telecommunications, communication was incredibly slow. It would have to go from one person, literally, to another. Suddenly, all the world's information, all of humanity's knowledge is instantly available to any person. That's just like one cell in your body having access to all the information about the rest of your body. We are going to face, in the mid part of the century, and particularly the latter part of the century, a demographic implosion, the likes of which we haven't seen, including the Black Plague. It's as though someone went through and killed half the population, or at least of the future population. There's something better happen to turn this around. At this rate, the only thing that'll be left will be robots. 3 generations of 50% birth rate, of 50% replacement rate, gets you to 12% of where you were. And those poor 12%, all they're going to be doing is taking care of their grandparents. I mean, eventually there just won't be people at that rate. The other, I think religious extremism is obviously a concern. If that grows over time. Yeah, I won't mention the third one. I hope the AI is nice to us. Well, I think there's going to be probably four, apart from the internet. There's the internet as sort of class as one sort of really big innovation, where humanity essentially acquired a nervous system and all of humanity's knowledge was instantly accessible from anywhere. But in the other areas, I think there's sustainable energy, so the transition to sustainable production and consumption of energy, hopefully the extension of life to another planet, sort of depends on what pace of progress is made in space transport and how long somebody lives, I guess. But then reading and we have reading genetics more or less, but writing genetics and AI.
You have a confidence that we have the capacity to do those things, the human species.
We're doing them. You're referring to the Hyperloop. I was reading about the high-speed rail project in California, and it just didn't. It seemed like we were going backwards. So it's almost like instead of going forward towards the Concorde, we actually went backwards towards the DC-3. That doesn't make any sense. Japan had some pretty impressive trains that they implemented in the 80s. Then China implemented an even more advanced train. So it seems that one should, in the UK and California, we should try to say, okay, what can we do that's a step beyond that? Not from the standpoint of one-upmanship, but rather from the standpoint of feeling that the future is going to be better. That's the thing that's if you get up in the morning and you think the future is going to be better, it's a bright day. Otherwise, it's not. I'm not actually against high-speed rail. If we just did high-speed rail, that was, say, a step above the Shanghai line. Yeah. Shanghai line is state-of-the-art in China. Right. Let's just take it just a half a notch better than that, and and then make sure we've got a straight path from LA to San Francisco as well as the Milk Run. Totally cool. I'm not saying we have to do the thing that I thought of. I just want us to have like a badass transportation system. I'm more optimistic than Stephen Hawking or Martin Rees, who's that astronomer royal. He's also quite. He thinks it's quite likely that civilization will end this century, and he's head of the Royal Society. You know, he's a smart guy. I hope he's wrong, but I'm personally more optimistic about civilization, and I did say multiplanetary. So it's not from the standpoint of like, oh, let's go have one planet but somewhere else. You know, we want to have multiple planets, and I mean, have some. I mean, if you can imagine some. You know, I hesitate to use the word utopian society in the future, but if you say, what's the future you want? What's the future that seems, oh, that'll be a good one? Then I think you want to have a future where we're a spacefaring civilization, a multi-planet species, and we're out there exploring the stars. It's going to be, I think that'd be great. Yeah. My motivation is more from the standpoint of it would be the best adventure and something really, really inspiring, and I think it would make life more fun. And I think that's personally the thing that motivates me the most. But I mean, a strong second, and I think for some people maybe it would be the first motivation, is the preservation of the future of consciousness and human civilization as we know it, which is much more likely if we're on multiple planets than if we're on one. The human consciousness has not been around very long from an evolutionary standpoint. It's really just like, feels to me like there was this little light that appeared suddenly, you know, Earth after 4.5 billion years. And it's hard to say, you know, how often does that happen? Maybe it's quite rare. In fact, it would appear to be quite rare, or they're very good at hiding. And so if it is a very rare thing, then we should take whatever actions we can to ensure its long-term survival. I mean, I think we have effectively created a kind of a superorganism. You know, just in the same way that when we just had multicellular creatures without nervous systems, and they would just communicate via osmosis. And before the internet, or particularly before advanced telecommunications, communication was incredibly slow. It would have to go from one person, literally, you know, to another, and maybe at best that person could carry a note from another person. That was, but it's still literally person to person. So unless one person bumps into another person, they're pretty much not going to communicate. And with telegraph and the telephone and then the internet, particularly the internet, suddenly all the world's information, all of humanity's knowledge is instantly available to any person. And that's just like one cell in your body having access to all the information about the rest of your body. It is evolution on a new plane. I think demographics is a real issue where people are not having kids in a lot of countries, and you know very often they'll say, "Oh, solve it with immigration." Immigration from where? If Europe has an average, or many parts of Europe have an average of a 50 or 60, you know, they're only at 50 or 60% of what's needed for replacement, or China for that matter. They're at half replacement rate. Where exactly are we going to find 600 million people to replace the ones that were never born? I think people are going to have to regard, to some degree, the notion of having kids as almost a social duty, within reason. I mean, just if you can and you're so inclined, you should. You know, it's like otherwise civilization will just die, literally. The birth rate is strongly correlated to, well, it's inversely correlated to wealth, inversely correlated to education, and correlated to religion. So the more religious you are, the less educated, and the poorer you are, the more kids you will have. And this is true across between countries and within countries. in the U.S., the highest birth rate is in Utah with the Mormons. Yeah. I think if you're saying what are threats to civilization, the lack of people is obviously a threat to civilization. We are going to face in the mid part of the century, and particularly the latter part of the century, a demographic implosion, the likes of which we haven't seen, including the Black Plague. The math is obvious. When did China ever experience a 50% reduction in its population? Never. I mean, basically, pre-writing, okay, because no one's ever written of such a thing. Even the Black Plague, I mean, when the Black Plagues would go through, I think that they might have demolished like a quarter, but never a half. And yet Spain, birth rate of 50%. It's as though someone went through and killed half the population, or at least of the future population. There's something better happen to turn this around, because otherwise, you have an inverted demographic pyramid, and it's going to. At this rate, the only thing that'll be left will be robots. 3 generations of 50% birth rate, of 50% replacement rate, gets you to 12% of where you were, and those poor 12%, all they're going to be doing is taking care of their grandparents. I mean, eventually there just won't be people at that rate. The other, I mean, I think religious extremism is obviously a concern. If that grows over time, particularly if it's a sort of a Luddite form of religious extremism. Anti-technology. Right, anti-science, right, exactly. Then that's an obvious threat. Yeah, I won't mention the third one.
What? Go ahead. In your mind, you have to say it.
I hope the AI is nice to us.